Greetings, everyone. Brett here with Hammerhead Model Making, and we are back with a brand new build episode. Today, we're going to be working on the Hobbycraft F9F-2 Panther. This is, and I've talked about this before. So I've built another Panther. I built a 72nd scale one a couple years ago, and that kit really surprised me at how much I enjoyed building it. But it also introduced me to this aircraft. This was pretty much an unknown to me prior to doing that 72nd scale build. And I've really learned to appreciate this aircraft. It's one of the very, very earliest jet aircraft that was used by the Navy and, actually put into production and used in a combat role. And I have an affinity for the early straight wing jets. And so this was a kit that, or at least this was an aircraft that I definitely wanted to build in 1/48 scale. And now I have been told that there are issues with the kit in terms of like accuracy and things, and I don't know enough about the Panther to comment on that. It does have some odd engineering choices, which I'll try to make sure to point out to you during the build. But overall, I really enjoyed this build, and I had a lot of fun with it. And I was able to practice certain paint techniques and various things that I've wanted to apply to future projects. So overall, I really enjoyed this kit. And I enjoyed the build, I enjoyed the process, and definitely happy with the end results. So, kind of with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the build here. You can see I've already gotten a little start on the cockpit, and it's not bad out of the box. You get a decent looking ejection seat, you get a decent looking cockpit with side panels, details, things like that. And with some careful painting, it can look pretty good. And you'll see here, I ended up breaking the nose landing gear strut. So this is one of those annoying, weird engineering choices that Hobbycraft took on this kit, is integrating the nose landing gear strut into kind of the structure of the nose wheel well. I ended up breaking it, so this is kind of how I'm showing you how I fixed it. Essentially, I'm using a very small drill bit, and I don't know what size it is. The drill bits that I get off of Amazon, they're not labeled or anything, so it's the orange size, if that helps. I'll leave a link down below to the drill bits that I get. And so I'm drilling out both halves of the strut, and then I take some, I think this is a 28 gauge floral wire, and I'm going to super glue that into the hole here. And I've cut it longer than I need it, so that way I can test fit and trim it to length. And then essentially I will super glue the bottom half of this on, and we'll have a pretty solid strut going forward. Shouldn't have any issue with it. So it's actually a relatively simple fix. So if this is something that happens to you, just be aware that is something you can do. I get the floral wire from my local arts and crafts store. They come in multiple different sizes. You just have to find one that's going to be, smaller diameter than the diameter of the strut, and then the drill bits. Next up, I'm going to use this new product, or this new to me product called Black Magic Metal, and this is like the best way I can describe it is a thicker aluminum foil, but it's not nearly as fragile as aluminum foil. Like, this stuff is really robust, and it's not crazy thick, like that you would think it is, but it's a lot stronger than it gives the impression to be. Additionally, it comes already with a coat of primer on it, hence the black in the name. It comes with black primer, but this stuff is just really nice for doing things like seatbelts, for example, on the ejection seat here. And you could there's a lot of applications for this. I've seen people use it for rifle slings on 35th scale figures. You could use this as tie-down straps on a 35th scale tank, using it for seat belts here on a 48 scale kit. You could easily use it for 72nd scale, things like that. And I'm actually going to be using more of this in a future build that will really showcase kind of the possibilities of what you can do with this stuff. But anyways, Black Magic Metal, I believe you can get it on, I think it's eBay. I'll leave a link down there below for it. This stuff's awesome. And like, so if you've ever just needed a thin foil but didn't want to use aluminum foil because it's just not durable or strong enough, this is for you. And I could have taken the detailing on these straps a little bit further, doing like buckles and stuff. Really wasn't interested in super detailing everything. So for me, I was good enough just having the straps on there, just showing something that instead of just like an empty ejection seat. I'm pretty happy with that. But if you had some like photo etch buckles or something, this would be a great thing to pair them with. And you could really have some fun detailing with the foil. So I definitely recommend it. Highly useful. I'm finding more uses for it every day. Well, not every day, but with each build that I do. And so yeah, moving on. With all the construction done, we can go ahead and get to painting. So you can see here, I've put all the sub-assemblies on these craft sticks with a little bit of poster putty or blue tack. And we're going to go ahead and get these primed. Now, I'm doing my priming off screen. The regular Mr. Surfacer 1500 has been a little difficult to acquire here recently. And so I'm using the spray can version, which I do out in the garage. So that's why you're not seeing me actually painting it, but I am using a spray can version of Mr. Surfacer 1500. Right now I'm using Vallejo white here to create some contrast, highlights on some of these panels and details. So then when I go over with the next layer of paint, they'll kind of pop out. And so it's basically like a pre-shade for a lot of the internal parts here. The Vallejo paint is thin, fairly thin. I would say at this point about 50-50 thinner paint. And just what allows me to get a nice finer mist color on there. Next up, we're going to be using this light green chromate color for our interior colors. One of the things that I really love about the early jets was the transition from using like the World War II era colors, like the zinc chromate, things like that. But it's like transitioning into the modern jet era, where you have an ejection seat, things like that. I find it really, really fun and enjoyable to paint. And additionally, like the green kind of makes a good contrast against the eventual blue color that the jet is going to be painted, and it just kind of helps it stand out a little bit more. For the ejection seat, we're going to hit it with some light ghost gray, and it'll kind of be a nice contrast with the rest of the cockpit. And it'll really help it pop out there. But go ahead and get that painted up and make sure we get all the nooks and crannies there. Next up, I'm going to be using this light red here to paint the inside of the speed brake area. However, it turned out orange, which is weird. I swear I shook it up. So we're going to switch it up with some Vallejo flat red. This is from their model range, which is a brush painting. But if you thin it enough, you can, and I'm using isopropyl alcohol to thin it, you can usually get a good nice spray. It's not as durable as the Vallejo air colors, but it can work in a pinch. And I knew that there wasn't going to be a lot of surface traffic on this interior area, so I wasn't worried about the durability. But the flat red definitely turned out much better and not orange like the other color, which was just bizarre. Not sure why it did that. The instrument panel, you'll notice I sprayed a big white section of the instrument panel here. The way that this kit is designed is you have the plastic part, and then you have a clear film that goes on top of that, and then on top of that is a piece of photo etch. So you sandwich the clear film in between the plastic part and the photo etch. The clear film has like dial stuff printed on it, and I've seen it before. I've never actually used it before, and I was really curious to see if it would work. I was kind of expecting it not to work, And so in a little bit, I'll show you how that goes. Right now, we're just hitting a lot of the detail painting in the cockpit area. For this, I am using Vallejo model color range in various colors. I just happen to be using black right now, but there are other colors that I use. I'm not gonna show on screen every single color, mainly just because I think you'll get the point here. But these are all Vallejo model colors, and just a matter of going around getting all the details. This can be a tedious part of the build, but it is something that I enjoy doing. While some of those interior parts are drying, we're going to go ahead and hit the exhaust here with some gunmetal color. It's kind of like a dark steel looking color. I really like it, and color I've been using more often in my builds lately. And then next up, we're going to go ahead and give things a little bit of a dry brush. If you're not familiar with the dry brush technique, you put paint on your brush, you wipe most of it off on a paper towel, and then you can lightly, very lightly brush over details, and the paint will stick to kind of the raised portions, but not the recesses, and it just allows you to kind of create a cool effect. So right now we're just going over all of the black areas with a light gray dry brush. And this just helps pick out a lot of those little details that would otherwise kind of get lost in the flat black color, and just helps create a little bit of visual interest in the cockpit. So we'll go ahead and do the side panels as well here. And this helps bring out some of the switch and dial details that are there, which, you know, they're not bad. They're pretty good looking. And the kit does not provide any kind of decal for the instruments. So unless you go like an aftermarket route, which I didn't really look into, you are left to having to hand paint everything, which, you know, not always a bad thing. Sometimes it's good to practice. We're going to go ahead and hit little splotches of color in here. I tried to find some good pictures of Panther cockpits. I didn't really come up with a lot of good pictures, so I'm kind of guessing with some of these colors here. So don't quote me on these, as it were, in terms of accuracy or placement. It just helps, in my opinion, just, again, like the dry brushing, just create a little bit more visual interest in the cockpit, and just, you know, a little bit more spots of detail to pick out. And I don't do that kind of painting very often, but for this one, it just felt right to do. Next up, we're going to go ahead and give everything a nice layer of Alclad Aqua Gloss. This is going to seal in all the work that we've done so far, protect the paint, but also allow us a nice smooth surface on which to do some pin washes and a little bit of weathering. So what I like about the Aqua Gloss is it is acrylic based. It dries really fast. It dries really hard, and it is pretty robust against like an enamel wash or an oil wash. So it allows for, you know, easy detailing with washes and pin washes and things like that. So we're just going to go ahead and apply the wash liberally all over to all the spaces that have color. If it's a black area, I'm not going to apply the wash because you're just not going to see it there. It doesn't make sense to, but everywhere that has a color other than black, we'll get some of the wash there. Helps create some contrast and nice variation between the colors. Creates a little bit of artificial shadow and a little bit more depth for these parts. So once the wash dries, it can just be wiped away with a cotton bud. Now this only works over the gloss coat. If this was just over straight paint or like a flat coat, you would have a really hard time wiping away the excess wash. So just be aware, if you do decide to use this technique, it needs to be done over the gloss coat. All right, so next up, we're going to tackle that instrument panel I was telling you about. So here is the clear film. We're just going to go ahead and cut this out, and you want to make sure that you do cut this as close as possible to the shape outline, because this does have to fit into a recess in the plastic, just like that. And the reason why I painted it white on the backside is so that it would help show the dial details better than it would against, because the actual dial details themselves are kind of transparent, and so having that white background just helps them stand out a little bit more. Now, to affix the clear transparency part, I'm just going to use some UV resin here, clear resin. The reason why I chose to use the clear resin as opposed to like a glue or something was just because I knew it wouldn't mar or otherwise harm the clear film. And because the clear film was kind of semi-opaque or semi-transparent, the UV light would still cure it through the thing and just really secure it on there. Next up, I'm going to use a very careful application of super glue here to affix the photo etch instrument panel face. So I'm just applying tiny little dots of super glue here in between the spaces where the instrument dials are, and then we'll go ahead and get our instrument panel face attached. You can see here, I do tend to be a little clumsy when using my fingers, but I'm also clumsy when using tweezers. So it's kind of a trade-off of trying to find the right balance between, do I use my fingers, do I use tweezers? But here we go. Honestly, I'm surprised how well this turned out and how good it looks. I really wasn't expecting much. I thought it was good. I just thought it was going to be a gimmick, but I have to admit, I'm really impressed with how well that turned out. And that's out of the box. So pretty cool. So at this point, we can go ahead and start assembling all of our painted stuff. I did hit everything with a matte coat to knock down the shine and seal in our pin wash. And so this means we can go ahead and get things assembled and put together. The cockpit going together really well. I definitely like the colors in the cockpit and the differences between the green, the black, and the gray. To me, it's a really good, handsome looking cockpit. And I'll have the window open, and it's a fairly large window as well, so you'll be able to see a lot of this detail, which it is always nice. So next up, we're going to move on to the fuselage and getting that all assembled. So to start that off, we have to prepare some of the internal stuff. Get the cockpit attaches to the wheel well. We have to get the exhaust turbine installed inside the exhaust pipe here. And as you can see, you're supposed to drop this in there, and it was proving difficult, but I did get it there in the end. So we can go ahead and attach the exhaust pipe here to the fuselage. There is a locating pin on only one side of the fuselage, so just be aware that you want to get it installed on this half of the fuselage, not the other half. Get the tail hook in there, and then we can get the cockpit and nose wheel assembly all installed in there. Overall, the fit here was pretty good, I have to admit. I was expecting some, massive seams and gaps and stuff, but in all things considered, it fit together pretty well. You have to get this little instrument panel hood on before you get the other fuselage half on, otherwise you won't, because it has to kind of fit underneath. It has to fit on top of the instrument panel, but underneath the fuselage halves. So make sure you do that part before putting your fuselage halves together. We're going to secure the fuselage halves with just a little bit of tape here. This is just going to hold the plastic together while I glue it. And for our glue here, we are using Tamiya extra thin cement, just running it in between all the cracks. Now I am avoiding any area directly adjacent to where the tape is, because I don't want the glue wicking underneath the tape and then getting out into areas that it might ruin detail. So I can get enough of the fuselage glued around the tape, and then once it dries, I remove the tape and glue the areas that were covered with tape previously. So with the fuselage glued together now, I can start tackling the seams. Like I mentioned before, the overall fit was pretty good. Some of these seams were less than ideal and did require a little bit of super glue filler, but I've definitely seen worse. So I start off my process using a jeweler's file. This just kind of knocks things down pretty aggressively to even out both sides of the seam. And then I follow up with successive, wet sanding sessions using progressively finer and finer sanding, either sandpaper or sanding foam, sponges, whatever I'm using or whatever you're using. Just work your way up to the higher grits until you're basically polishing the plastic. And the reason why I wet sand is just to help cut down on, dust, sanding dust everywhere, cuts down on the mess. And I feel, and I don't have verifiable scientific proof of this, but I feel like you get a better sand out of a wet sanding than you do with dry sanding. Next up, you have to open up some holes in the wings, depending on the type of ordnance that you want to install. And so you gotta make sure you do this before you do the glue the wing halves together. Otherwise, you'll run into trouble. The annoying thing here is that the openings for the rocket stubs are like this rectangle shape. Kind of annoying, but it does mean you do get nice proper alignment for the rocket stubs, and you don't have to worry about things getting misaligned. So with that, we can get the fuselage wings, or sorry, not the fuselage, we can get the wing halves glued together and clamped to secure it. Now, there's one thing I want to point out about this that I did notice. The kit offers you the option to have the flaps on the wings raised or lowered. However, which is nice. I'm always a big fan of options. If you've watched the channel enough, you know I'm a big fan of options. But the problem is the flaps were a two-part system. You have flaps on the wings, and then you had flaps on the underside of the fuselage as well. And as far as I know, it was all or nothing. So either all of the flaps would be down or none of the flaps would be down. You wouldn't have just the wing flaps, but not the fuselage flaps. So unfortunately, if you want to accurately represent the flaps down, you would have to cut out and modify the fuselage flaps as well as the wing flaps. So it's kind of annoying because I would have liked to have had the flaps down, but it is what it is. And in the end, I opted to have the wings folded instead of having the flaps down. If I'd done flaps down, I would have had the wings extended, but because I couldn't do the flaps down, I opted to have the wings folded. So just bear that in mind. Right now that I've done all of the sanding and polishing and smoothing of the seam lines, I can go about restoring all of the detail that I sanded away. So I'm using a very fine razor saw here to restore the panel lines, and then I'm using this Galaxy Tools riveter with the 0.75 Ponce wheel on it to restore the rivets. This Galaxy Tools riveting tool was sent to me by one of my patrons, and I am very grateful for it because this has been a fabulous tool, far better than like the old trumpeter riveter that I had that was very difficult to use. And with like the Rosie the Riveter tool being hard to find or expensive these days, the Galaxy Tools is a great alternative. Here you can see the nose cone all cleaned up and polished, getting the guns installed, test fitting the nose onto the fuselage. It was a pretty good fit there. Another shortcoming of this kit is the fact that they do not provide you with any first stage compressor detail, or at least like full intake trunking. It just kind of opens up into the wing. So I decided the best way to deal with that would just be to install some FOD covers. And I cut these out of some thick plastic card and did a little bit of trimming to get them to fit, but eventually got them to fit into the intakes, and kind of just solves my problem of having this empty void inside the aircraft. One thing you do not want to forget with this kit is nose weight. It is extremely tail heavy, but in addition to being tail heavy, it also sits at like an upward angle, so the tail is already like naturally low. So you want to make sure that you really pack in the weight here into the nose. I ended up putting in 2 of these lead weights in order to get it to sit correctly. So just as a heads up, you will need nose weight in this. Moving on with the rest of the fuselage, we can get these fairings installed. We can get the wing fold, sections installed here. If you were doing the wing straight, you would omit these parts here and just glue the outer wing to the inner portion of the wing. It's basically a butt joint, so I question how well it would fit. But the wing fold was equally as iffy. You have to install these little L-shaped tabs in here, and you don't get a lot of like depth for the plastic to go into the actual fuselage portion. So there was some question as to whether or not it would hold, it would support its weight. But in the end, it worked out. I wasn't originally going to add detail to the back deck of the cockpit here, but after test fitting the canopy and seeing just how like large and flat and open this space was with the canopy open, I decided it would be in the best interest to add a little bit of detail here. I wasn't going for super crazy accurate, just kind of trying to represent the rails that the canopy would slide on, and just a little bit of the detail back there, but also to kind of cover that large hole that was there. And basically the way that what the kit was expecting you to do was to put this little like inverted T-shaped piece on the inside of the canopy here that would then like go down and lock into that channel that was in the top of the fuselage, and you'd be able to kind of slide the canopy forward and backwards. I mean, it's a gimmick, so it definitely isn't worth the time to install that, and rather just detail over that and it'll look a little bit better. Gun sights installed. You can see here how the canopy is going to sit. This was going to help me determine where I needed to trim all the plastic here to get the canopy to fit correctly. You can see I used a lot of extra length here. That was just mainly just so that I had the room to measure this and cut as needed. It's always better to remove than to add material, so definitely enjoy having the extra material there, not needing it, than not having the material and need it and have to add more material. Anyways, simple enough detail to add to the back here. It does just help liven that area up a little bit. The front windscreen is installed. Fit here was pretty good, no issues. Just be careful when you're using extra thin around clear parts. You don't want it to wick into something and mar up your clear part. I've definitely run into that a few times. Finally, I'm going to show you how I'm masking the canopy. I don't have a mask set for this, so I have to do this one on my own. But essentially, I lay a piece of tape onto the clear part, burnish it down with a sharpened wooden skewer to highlight the edges of the canopy frame, and then using a brand new X-Acto blade here, I'm very lightly, just with enough pressure to push through the tape, cutting around the internal frame here. You definitely want to make sure you're using a new fresh blade for this, because the last thing you want is you're trying to cut and the blade catches the tape and starts ripping the tape, or your blade slips and you slice right across the clear part. That's nothing worse than having to fix those types of errors and deal with it. So definitely use a nice sharp blade here, but go through and there we go. So I'll just kind of do that for the rest of the canopy, and using a lot of liquid mask here as well, but clear, masking off all of the areas that we don't want to get paint on. All right, next up, we are going to move on to painting. As I mentioned before, I primed this off camera using some Mr. Surfacer 1500 black out of the spray cam. And now we're going to do a similar pre-shading technique like we used on the interior all over the aircraft. Now, this aircraft would have been painted like the non-specular glossy sea blue. And on its own, it's kind of a boring color. And so one of the techniques that I wanted to test out on this was creating an interesting pre-shading pattern that would give me a really subtle, effect once I laid down the main color. So I'm starting off with white. And so the concept in my mind that I'm using is I want to have a fairly neutral color, a warm color, and then a cool color as my pre-shade colors. And the end goal is to be able to create variations in the glossy sea blue that will be really subtle, but if you look close enough, you'll be able to see them. So for my warm color, I'm using this desert sand color. And just trying to be as random as I can, even though humans by nature are not very good at being random, but just trying to pick out alternate panels that I can paint there. And then for my cool color, I'm using the Skyline Blue by Ammo MIG. And again, just like with the other two colors, we're just gonna, apply them in different panels and highlight different areas. And you can see I'm using different strengths of the color. I'm laying it down, pretty solid in some areas and not as solid in other areas. Again, this is all just the plan is to create a lot of very subtle variation in the end paint scheme. So when you have an aircraft that is all one single color, I think something like this will help to break up that color and create more visual interest in what would otherwise be a kind of a bland, boring color. At this point, I decided to paint the main wheel wells because there's a center portion that I need to install. The center landing gear doors were kept closed and only opened while the landing gear was transitioning between raised or lowered. And so I just figured it'd be easier just to paint the landing gear bay as is and then install here's that center cover there. And then just mask off the little portions there. So now it's time for our glossy sea blue. And in order to take advantage of all the pre-shading that we have done, I've thinned this down really heavily, probably about 70% thinner. And the idea here is I'm just going to slowly build up layer by layer the opacity that I want in the glossy sea blue. And you'll notice a point here where all of a sudden it starts looking pretty dark, and a lot of that pre-shade appears to disappear. That was kind of what I was going for. And when you see the final results, you'll be able to pick out some of the color variations. The camera does not do a great job of really showing just how subtle it is. In person, it definitely looks much better. And you can really pick up on some of the panel variations on the finished product in person. But so roundabout way I'm trying to say is I got the effect that I wanted, that I was striving for. It just doesn't show up on camera very well. So take that as you will. There are certain areas on the leading edges of the wings, the tail, the elevators that were, from what I could gather, were painted like a silver lacquer or an aluminum colored lacquer on the aircraft that wasn't actual bare metal. I could be wrong, but that was what my limited research led me to. So I've masked off a lot of the leading edges of like horizontal stabilizers, the wings, things like that, to paint this color. And I'm using the Vallejo aluminum here because it doesn't have quite the shine of like a lacquer metallic paint would, like an Alclad or something. And to me, it gives a good representation of like a painted silver lacquer on here. The masking this off was annoying, it was tricky, but definitely worth it in the end to do it properly. Next up, I'm going to mask off and paint the inside of the wing fold area. Pretty straightforward and simple. The next bit is the marking. So I opted to use the kit comes with 4 different marking options, and I opted to use the markings for the Panther that achieved the first air-to-air kill for Panthers in the Korean War. I believe it shot down it actually shot down a piston-powered aircraft, like a LA-5 or something. I don't recall. It wasn't a jet. It didn't shoot down a MiG. There are markings for the first Panther to shoot down a MiG, but I found the markings for this one just a little bit more visually interesting. So there's this kind of scalloped flash on the front and then a little bit of flash on the tail here of red. And I like the contrast. I like the pop of color on, and the funny thing is red actually goes together really well with blue, and they look good together. And so the blue definitely stands out and is a nice little pop of color on this aircraft. Now, one of the fortunate things that does help break up the monotony of an all glossy sea blue airplane is the fact that the Navy really liked to put a lot of stencil data on these aircraft, and they used white paint to paint the stencil data. So you'll see when we get further on into the build during the decal phase, there's a lot of great visual interest that you can add to this with all of the stencil data. It's kind of a pain to apply, but it definitely looks good when it's done. and really helps pop. So next up, we're going to hit everything with some of our aqua gloss here, and get a nice good solid coat on the entire aircraft. So this helps, as I mentioned before, this helps seal in all of our paintwork up to this point, but also gives us a good foundation for applying decals and further weathering. I ended up doing 2 full coats across the aircraft to get to the level that I wanted, and now we can move on to the decals and weathering. So I am using the Hobbycraft kit decals, and overall they performed pretty well. I don't have any major complaints. They were slightly on the thick side, not quite Tamiya thick, but still thick enough that it took a while to really get these decals to suck down and conform to all the nice surface detail the kit has. But eventually I was able to get there. Colors seemed good, and in register, no real issues overall. So once you get all the decals on, we're going to use this Solvaset here, and the Solvaset is designed to soften the decal and help it like conform down to all the detail. It took a couple applications, like I mentioned, because these decals were rather thick, but we did get there. And then after another quick coat of gloss over the decals, I'm going to move on to doing a panel wash. Now, normally for aircraft, I would use my dark brown wash for green vehicles, but since that won't show up at all on this aircraft, I had to create my own wash. And so I decided to go through with like a kind of like a medium neutral grayish color. I wanted something that would stand out against the dark blue, but not so much that it looked cartoonish. And so I kind of mix up this medium gray here, and we're going to go ahead and apply this all over the aircraft. This kit has a lot of surface detail, a lot of rivets. They definitely use their rivet budget on this one. So you have a lot of opportunity for the wash to bring out a lot of that detail. And initially I was a little concerned that it was kind of strong. And you'll see when we start wiping this off that in some areas it does really kind of stand out. And I went back and forth on whether or not I was liking it or not, or if it was too strong, whether I should go back over it with a slightly darker version, tone it down a little bit. And it's funny because in the end, I was like, you know what, I'm just going to leave it and call it good. It'll just be what it is. And then I went over with a satin coat to seal everything in, and the satin coat actually ended up kind of dulling down the wash a little bit. And I ended up really liking it afterwards, and it was just the right amount. Like, you could see it. It wasn't super prominent, but it was still there. It ended up working out really good. So for a few of the metallic areas and over around some of the decals, I did use my dark brown wash here just to pop out that detail, because the light wash that I made wouldn't work over these areas. So I selected those and added those in, as needed. So like I said, going with the satin coat. Didn't want to go with a flat coat. As the name implies, the paint was originally a glossy sea blue. There would still be a little bit of shine even after being out to sea in the salt air and in combat, in operations. The glossy sea paint, while very durable, which is one of the reasons why the Navy liked it, it would eventually start to break down. And so I was kind of in my mind, I was thinking like, oh, we'll kind of go for that transition phase. You'll notice here, I'm not doing, other than the panel wash, I'm not doing any weathering on this. Most of my reference pictures showed that these aircraft were pretty well maintained and kept in a clean condition. I really struggled to find any good, meaningful pictures of like genuine weathering. So for this one, I am, opting away from my normal, slightly heavy, over-weathered look. But it's good to change up your routine every now and then and to try something that you're maybe not necessarily used to. But, moving on, we can kind of start assembling all of our sub-assemblies, getting it all together, and finishing up a lot of our smaller details here. The assembly of the landing gear was a little tricky. Some of the connection pins and openings were pretty loose, so trying to get alignment correctly was kind of a challenge. Um, and not a lot of solid positive, this fits here and it only fits in one specific way. So definitely got to watch out for that during this final assembly phase, just to make sure that you're getting everything aligned properly and that it's all looking correct. The one nice thing here, so the doors for the nose wheel well had these really big chunky pegs that would fit into these holes in the fuselage, and those were actually really nice and very useful and offered a very secure bond for the nose doors. But the rest of it was kind of iffy, and kind of a little stress, inducing trying to get all these parts aligned with each other, with the fuselage, and making sure that it was all sitting correctly. Because there's nothing worse than like you're building your model, you get all this stuff on, and then one of the wheels is kind of canted off to one side or something. That can be frustrating. So we can get the horizontal stabilizers installed. These were almost a press fit. They fit really nice, and no issues getting these parts fitted on. I did obviously use a little bit of glue, but you don't need a whole lot. We can get the speed brakes installed. Now, realistically, would the speed brakes be open and deployed while the aircraft is parked on the aircraft carrier? No, absolutely not. But it just looks really cool, and I like it. So that's why I did it. Get the little actuators installed. I believe on the actual aircraft, there's actual perforations in the speed brakes here, and I didn't find any good reference pictures on how that all worked out, because the inside you can see this slightly different, so I didn't know if there was like perforations on the outside and then a different panel on the inside, so I opted not to drill them out. So just FYI. The ordnance, we have rockets. We have like the 5-inch rockets, the HVAR rockets, and then a couple of, I think these are 250-pound bombs. The navigation lights are going to get a little thin coat of UV resin, and then so the process here was paint some aluminum on the light, paint clear red or green over that. Once that dries, then you do the clear UV resin, and then cure that, and then that's your navigation light. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward, but I definitely like the look. There's also 2 white lights on the back end of the tail, so don't forget those. Install the pitot tube. Important here. I made the error of actually gluing the pitot tube on earlier prior to painting, and then realized that there's going to have to be a big decal that goes right over that spot, so I had to remove it and then install it at the end. Right now I'm installing the little ladder that the little retractable step ladder that the pilot would step on to get inside the cockpit. We can get the ordnance installed on the wing. I was actually really impressed by the fit of the rockets. The way that they install on there was actually kind of nice and looks really good. The bomb goes on. It kind of slots into the shackles there, but it worked. So I wanted to display my Panther on a little section of carrier deck. So I designed a section of carrier deck and 3D printed it. It's a pretty rough print. You can see some of the print lines in here. It's not meant to be like an award-winning diorama base, but mainly just to have something to put my model on, to give it some context. And it's all one piece, so it prints in about 2.5 hours, and I can paint it up. I primed it and then painting it here. So doing the wood layer first, spray some heavy chipping fluid over that, and then we will go ahead and spray the next color, which is going to be this medium blue. So this is going to represent our deck blue that I believe this particular Panther flew off the carrier USS Essex during the Korean War. So this is meant to represent the Essex carrier deck, as it would have At this point of time, I think eventually it got a more modern flight deck as opposed to the wood one. But activating the chipping fluid, you just get the you get a section wet and then gently rub your brush, and it'll start pulling up the blue paint to expose our wood color underneath. And just kind of wanted to show a worn deck. I don't know how worn the Essex's deck would have been during this period of time, so definitely taking a little bit of creative license here, just to show a little. Mainly, this is just kind of like a hey, look what we can do with this cool 3D print. Next up, we're going to do all of the metal bits here. So I've masked off all of the tie down strips and the the elevator area, and I'm just dabbing on this steel color here, this gunmetal color, to kind of show like the paint's chipping to show the bare metal underneath. That was kind of the intention here. So once that's done, we can go ahead and peel off our masking tape, and that's going to wrap up this build. So if you've managed to make it this far, thank you so much for watching and supporting this channel. I greatly appreciate it. I had a lot of fun with this build. I like how it turned out. My experiment in the painting process, I'm really pleased with it. Like I said, it's not as noticeable on camera, but in person, it looks really nice. It looks really great. There's a lot of subtle variations in the overall sea blue color. Very pleased with it, and definitely this is one that I'm very glad to have in my collection. So yeah, thank you for watching. If you want to further support the channel, if you're not already a subscriber to the channel, please hit the subscribe button. Hit the notification button. I try to get videos out every week. Most of I do review videos, and then I do build videos and other compilation videos, things like that. So definitely consider subscribing if you like the content, if you like what I'm doing here. If you want to support the channel further, you can support me over on Patreon, and you get access to all the videos early. There is some exclusive content that you get on there. You get a lot more direct interaction with me as a creator, as well as what's currently happening on my workbench, things like that. And so yeah, I do want to give a huge shout out to my current patrons right now for supporting this channel and helping me to bring content like this to you. They're amazing people, and I absolutely love interacting with them, and they're a lot of fun. You can also follow me over on Instagram, just at Hammerhead Model Making. On Instagram, I'm posting multiple times a week, current work in progress, sharing other people's amazing work, and yeah, check out some of my partners down below in the description. And finally, thanks for watching, and we'll see you all on the next video. Take care, everyone.